The grand wedding hall was alive with excitement. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm golden glow across the guests, all seated, eagerly awaiting the moment Emma had dreamed of her entire life. The scent of fresh roses hung in the air, blending with the soft notes of a string quartet. Every corner of the room was meticulously arranged, every detail perfect. Yet, standing at the altar, Emma couldn't shake the cold feeling creeping up her spine. She stood there, waiting for Nathan, the man she loved, the man who had promised to spend forever with her. The dress, the flowers, the vows. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. But Nathan wasn't there. At first, Emma told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was caught in traffic. Maybe he was backstage, getting ready. But as the minutes ticked by, the whispers began. Slowly at first, then growing louder. "Where is Nathan?" The guests exchanged nervous glances, shifting in their seats. Emma could feel the tension building. She clasped her hands together, trying to remain composed, but her palms were slick with sweat. She looked down the aisle, her eyes scanning the entrance for any sign of him, but there was nothing. The door remained closed. Her mother stood nearby, visibly uncomfortable. Her father clenched his jaw, his gaze fixed on the entrance as if willing Nathan to appear. But no one was coming. Emma's stomach twisted with a cold, gnawing sense of dread. She glanced at her best friend, Jessica, standing beside her, and saw the worry in her eyes. What was happening? And then, suddenly, the worst kind of silence fell over the crowd. Her best friend, Jessica, rushed towards her, pushing her way through the sea of people, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. "Jess!" Emma's voice barely reached her, trembling as she reached out to her friend. Jessica grabbed Emma's hand, her grip tight and unsteady. "Emma, he's gone." The words hit Emma like a slap to the face. Her heart stopped for a moment. "Gone?" she repeated, unable to process what Jessica was saying. "He left," Jessica whispered, barely able to meet her gaze. "He left. With her." Everything around Emma blurred. Her knees began to buckle beneath her, and she struggled to stay upright. Gone? With her? Her chest tightened, a wave of nausea sweeping over her. Nathan, her Nathan, had left her on their wedding night, in front of all these people. The man she loved, the man who was supposed to be standing beside her forever, had abandoned her. The room felt like it was closing in. The wedding, the love, the promises, everything slipping away in an instant. The whispers spread like wildfire, louder now, harsh, and judgmental. Everyone had heard. Her parents stood frozen, their faces etched with disbelief, their eyes full of sorrow. Emma's gaze flicked to her mother, who seemed to be struggling with her own emotions. Her mother who had watched her only daughter prepare for this day for months. But this wasn't the day she had imagined. And then, it hit her harder than she could have ever expected. She was standing alone in front of everyone she had ever known. Everyone was waiting for Nathan, the man who had promised to love her forever. And now, he was with someone else. The weight of the betrayal was unbearable. Her legs gave way. She reached for Jessica, but her friend's arm couldn't support her. Emma felt herself falling, as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. Before she could even grasp what was happening, everything faded. The sounds, the people, the heartbreak, all became distant, muffled. Everything went black. Emma's eyes flickered open, her senses assaulted by the bright white lights that filled the hospital room. For a moment, everything seemed muffled, like she was waking from a long, deep sleep. Her head was heavy, as though a fog had settled in her mind, and there was a dull, persistent throb in her chest. Where am I? The thought floated in her mind, but it didn't make sense. The sterile smell of antiseptics stung her nose. The rhythmic beeping of the machines beside her was the only sound in the room. She turned her head, trying to focus, but her vision was still blurry, like looking through fogged glass. A hospital room. That's when it hit her. The wedding. The ceremony. Nathan. The altar. His absence. The betrayal. A wave of dizziness washed over her as she tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her body, and she recoiled, gasping. No, not yet. She couldn't process the pain and the emotions all at once. She lay back down, the soft hospital sheets cool against her skin, but the coldness of the room didn't match the feverish heat in her veins. "Sweetheart, you're awake!" A voice spoke from beside her, soft and filled with relief. Emma's eyes drifted to the side, and she saw her mother, her face pale, eyes swollen. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days. Her mother's hand reached for Emma's, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around her hand. Emma tried to speak, but her throat was dry, and the words barely left her lips. What happened? Her father, standing beside her mother, cleared his throat. He was trying to keep his usual stoic demeanor, but there was an unmistakable softness in his eyes, a hint of concern that Emma had never seen before. You fainted, sweetheart. You collapsed. After everything that happened, you just couldn't take it. His voice faltered, and for the first time in years, Emma saw him as vulnerable. A man who couldn't fix things for her, who couldn't shield her from the pain she was facing. Fainting. Her body had given in to the unbearable weight of everything crashing down. But her mind, her heart, were still struggling to make sense of what had happened. Nathan had left her, at the altar, on their wedding day, with her. The betrayal, the humiliation, everything she had thought she would never experience was happening. The world had turned upside down, and Emma wasn't sure how to step back into it. She tried to sit up again, her hand coming to her forehead as she winced. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional agony that flooded her heart. "No," she whispered. I don't understand. Why? Why would he do this?" Her parents exchanged a glance, their faces clouded with sorrow. But they said nothing. Emma could see the pain in their eyes. They had tried to protect her, to shield her from this heartbreak, but they too were just as lost as she was. As her mind tried to piece together the fragments of the day, the memories began to surface. Nathan's absence, the whispers, the glares, the pitiful stares. The moment Jessica had rushed in, breathless, pale, telling her that Nathan had left. Left with her. Emma's heart seemed to stop as the weight of those words crushed her all over again. How had it come to this? How could someone who had promised to love her forever, someone who had been her rock, her soulmate, turn his back on her like that? Her mother's voice broke through the haze. "Sweetheart, listen. I know this is hard, but you're not alone. We're here for you. We'll get through this together." She was trying to be strong for Emma, but her voice wavered, betraying the fear she felt deep inside. Emma's mother had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. But now, in this moment, she didn't have the answers. They didn't have the answers. Emma squeezed her mother's hand, but the words felt empty. Alone. She was alone, even with her parents sitting there beside her. How could anyone truly understand what she was feeling? Her body had been left behind at the altar, abandoned in front of everyone she loved. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could he do this to me? After everything we shared, after everything we built?" Her father leaned in, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You're strong, Emma, stronger than you think, and we'll help you get through this, step by step." But Emma didn't feel strong. She felt weak, crushed. Her dreams had been shattered, her future torn apart in the blink of an eye. Everything she had built, everything she thought she knew about love, had been destroyed. She had trusted Nathan with her heart, with her life. And now, he had taken that trust and trampled on it without a second thought.
Her mind raced as she thought about what happened next. The media, the press would already be reporting on the runaway groom story. Nathan's new relationship with Olivia would be all over the headlines, while Emma would be left as the tragic figure. The girl who had been stood up on the day she was supposed to marry the love of her life. The woman who had been humiliated in front of her closest friends and family. The world would see her as nothing more than a victim. Social media would be flooded with posts about her. People would talk about her, pity her, gossip about her heartbreak. She could already picture the comments, the sympathy, the cruel memes, the judgment. Nathan, on the other hand, would be portrayed as the poor man who was stuck in a bad situation. But the truth was so much darker. Emma's chest tightened as the inward pain grew. Why did this happen? What had she done wrong? Was she not good enough? Was she not lovable enough for Nathan? The tears began to fall, one by one, as she let out a shuddering breath. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to feel weak, but she couldn't stop it. The tears were for the dreams she had lost, for the man who had promised forever, and for the betrayal that had shattered her. Her mother held her tightly, brushing her hair away from her face, but it didn't help. Emma felt as if the weight of the world was bearing down on her. The pitying glances, the whispers of shame, they were unbearable. She wanted to escape, to run away from everything, but she couldn't. This was her reality now. This was the world she had to live in. The room felt smaller with each passing minute. The four walls closed in on her, and no matter how hard she tried to push them away, they only got closer. The quiet voices of concern from her parents were drowned out by the crushing weight of her thoughts. Her friends, her family, they all cared, but the isolation inside her was suffocating. She was lost in this sea of humiliation and pain. She wanted to believe that things would get better, that this was just a bad moment she would get through. But how? How could she trust herself again? How could she trust anyone again after Nathan had shattered her so completely? The days blurred together after the disaster. Emma spent more time in bed than she ever had in her entire life. The world outside continued, but inside her apartment, time stood still. She couldn't face it, the outside world, the judgment, the pity, the whispers that followed her every move. Her eyes remained swollen from crying, and she found herself staring at the same four walls day after day. The feeling of emptiness was suffocating. She felt like a stranger in her own life. But then, one day, there was a knock at the door. It was Jessica, her best friend, her rock. Emma hadn't seen her much in the weeks following the wedding. She had retreated into herself, shutting out anyone who might see her weakness. But Jessica had always been the kind of friend who wouldn't take no for an answer. "Emma," Jessica said softly as she entered the apartment, walking straight up to where Emma sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the TV. "We need to talk." Emma barely looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to talk, Jess." Jessica sat down beside her, placing a gentle hand on Emma's. "I know it's hard, but you can't keep hiding. You're stronger than this." There was no judgment in her voice, just love, concern, and an understanding Emma hadn't felt in a long time. "I can't face the world, Jess," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've lost everything." "No," Jessica said firmly. "You haven't lost everything. You still have yourself. You just need to find her again." Emma blinked, trying to understand. "How? How can I find her when everything feels like it's falling apart?" "By channeling your pain into something productive, something that will make you feel alive again." Jessica's words were like a lifeline Emma wasn't sure she could reach for, but deep down, she knew she had to. She had to change. "Start with something small, something that's just for you. Exercise. Focus on your health. Take care of yourself," Jessica suggested, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. "And then, we'll talk about your career." Exercise. Health. Career. The words echoed in Emma's mind. She had neglected everything in the pursuit of Nathan's love, her career, her ambitions, her body, and her mind. But Jessica was right. It was time to reclaim her life. That evening, after Jessica left, Emma made her first decision. She would go for a walk. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next day, she put on her sneakers and left her apartment, stepping into the cold morning air. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but with every step she took, it felt just a little lighter. The first few days were hard, exhausting even. She could barely get through a mile without feeling winded. Her body had grown weaker during the months of emotional turmoil, but she kept going. Slowly, she found herself walking farther, running longer. Her body responded, and with it, something inside her began to shift. She was no longer sitting in a fog of sorrow. She was taking control, one step at a time. Soon after, she enrolled in a local gym, focusing on strength training. Her muscles ached, her body sore in ways she hadn't experienced before, but it felt good. Real. Her body was becoming stronger, and so was her mind. With each workout, she felt herself shedding the layers of pain Nathan had left behind. The more she focused on improving herself, the less space the hurt had to take up in her mind. By the time a month had passed, Emma felt a change. Not just in her body, but in her spirit. She was reclaiming her strength. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't feel disgust or weakness. She felt pride. For the first time in a long time, Emma saw a woman who was capable of standing on her own. But it wasn't just physical growth. Emma knew she had to rebuild her career too. She'd spent years supporting Nathan's career, following him from event to event, neglecting her own dreams. Her own ambitions had been pushed aside, swallowed by the need to make Nathan proud. But now it was time for her. She spent hours updating her resume, revisiting her passions. Emma had always dreamed of working in fashion marketing, but she had sacrificed that dream for a future that no longer existed. One evening, while browsing online, she found the perfect opportunity, an opening for a junior marketing role at a reputable fashion firm in the city. It was exactly what she needed. Her heart raced as she clicked the apply button, a wave of excitement and fear coursing through her. But she had to try. This was her moment to step into her own light. A week later, she received an email inviting her for an interview. The moment the email arrived, Emma couldn't stop smiling. She was being given a second chance. She prepared for the interview like it was the most important thing in the world, because it was. She dressed confidently, stood tall, and entered the interview room with a newfound sense of self-worth. The interview went well. No, better than well. Emma had knocked it out of the park. She knew it, and the hiring manager knew it too. A week later, she received the job offer. She had done it. She had rebuilt herself from the inside out. She had found the strength to move on, to reclaim her life and her purpose. As she stepped into her new role, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: confidence, pride. She no longer needed Nathan's validation. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had found the one thing she had lost so long ago: herself. And with each passing day, as she grew stronger, more confident, and more successful, Emma knew that she had taken back control of her life. She would never again let anyone dictate her worth. Nathan's betrayal had been the catalyst for her transformation, but it was no longer his story, it was hers. A new, stronger Emma had emerged, and she was finally ready to face the world on her own terms. Nathan had always been the confident, successful man everyone admired. He was charming, suave, and everyone around him seemed to worship the ground he walked on, especially Olivia. At first, she had seemed like the perfect partner. She was beautiful, captivating, and had an energy that made Nathan feel alive again. It was easy for him to convince himself that Emma had been holding him back, that their relationship had become too predictable, too comfortable. Olivia was fresh, exciting, and full of ambition. She represented everything Nathan thought he wanted in his life, especially after he walked away from Emma at the altar. But as the weeks passed, the perfect facade began to crack. Olivia, once the charming, loving partner, started to reveal a darker side of herself. Her sweet smiles were replaced with calculating looks, and her seemingly supportive nature began to feel more controlling. Olivia didn't want just Nathan's love. She wanted his status, his wealth, and everything he could provide her. At first, Nathan tried to brush it off. She was just passionate, she was driven, and he admired that in her. But it didn't take long for him to realize the truth. Olivia didn't love him. She loved what he could do for her, and the more he gave, the more she took. It started subtly, small comments about how he could make more money or how they could upgrade their lifestyle. Then came the arguments about how much time he spent away from her and how she needed his attention more. Nathan, once so sure of his choices, found himself feeling trapped. Olivia was no longer the woman who made him feel special. She was suffocating him, demanding more and more, but never offering anything in return. Then the unthinkable happened. Nathan walked in on Olivia talking on the phone with a man, her voice sweet and flirtatious, promising him that she would be over later to take care of business. The moment Nathan heard her words, his stomach churned. He had always trusted Olivia, believed that they were building something real. But now the betrayal was clear. Olivia was cheating on him. The walls Nathan had built to protect himself were crumbling, piece by piece, and for the first time since he left Emma, he realized how badly he had screwed up. His world began to fall apart, and it wasn't just Olivia's betrayal that shattered him. The domino effect had begun. Nathan's once thriving career began to falter. His job, which he had once held with such pride, started to feel suffocating. He missed meetings, made poor decisions, and his work ethic, once the foundation of his success, began to wane. His boss, seeing the drop in performance, gave him an ultimatum: either shape up or lose his position. But Nathan wasn't the same confident man anymore. He tried to salvage what he could, but it was too late. The cracks had already formed. Olivia, as if sensing Nathan's unraveling, began to distance herself further. She was never at home, always busy with important things. Nathan's attempts to reach her, to fix things, were met with cold indifference. She had found someone else, and Nathan was simply the man who could provide the lifestyle she wanted. He had once been her world, but now he was just a stepping stone. As his professional and personal life spiraled downward, Nathan began to realize that the life he had built, the success he once prided himself on, was slipping through his fingers. The man he once was, the charming, confident Nathan, had been replaced by someone weak, lost, and unsure of who he was anymore, and it was all his fault. One evening, while drowning in a glass of whiskey, Nathan sat in front of his computer, scrolling aimlessly through social media. His mind was numb, his heart a hollow shell. And then he saw it. Emma. The post was simple, a picture of her standing confidently outside a business building, dressed in a professional outfit, a smile on her face that seemed to radiate strength and independence. The caption read, "New beginnings, new goals. I'm excited for what's ahead." Nathan froze, staring at the screen. Emma had done it. She had rebuilt her life, without him. She had risen from the pain he had caused her, and she was thriving. She was now the woman he had once admired, the woman he had loved, but had never truly appreciated. She was successful, confident, and above all, she was free. Free of him. The weight of it hit him like a wave. How could he have left her? For so long he had convinced himself that Emma had been the problem, that she was too predictable, too comfortable. But now, seeing her standing there, accomplished and powerful, Nathan realized what he had taken for granted. He had taken Emma's love for granted. He had taken her trust, her support, and her loyalty for granted. He had been blind to her strength, and now it was too late. A deep, gnawing regret settled in his chest. Why had he left her? Why had he chosen Olivia, who had never truly loved him, over the woman who had always been there for him, who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself? Nathan closed his laptop, his hands shaking. He rubbed his face, trying to push the tears back, but they came anyway. For the first time since he left Emma, Nathan cried. He cried for the love he had lost, for the woman he had abandoned, for the life he had thrown away. He had ruined everything, and now all that was left was the bitter sting of regret. As his world crumbled around him, the one thing that became clear to Nathan was that he would never be able to undo the damage he had caused. He had lost Emma, the woman who had loved him unconditionally. And no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried to fix it, he could never get her back. Emma had just wrapped up her morning meeting when her assistant buzzed her. "Miss Hayes, there's someone here to see you. It's Nathan Sullivan." The name hit her like a jolt of electricity, and her heart skipped a beat. Nathan. She hadn't heard from him since the day he left her at the altar. After everything that had happened, Emma had worked tirelessly to move on, to rebuild her life, but the thought of him was still a knife in her chest. She hadn't expected him to ever come back, but here he was. "Send him in," she replied, her voice calm, though her insides churned. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him again, but she couldn't avoid this moment forever. The door opened and Nathan stepped inside, his usually confident posture now hunched, his eyes filled with shame and regret. His tailored suit, once sharp and perfect, now looked out of place, like a man who no longer fit into the life he had once owned.
Emma stood up from her desk, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. There was so much to say, but words seemed inadequate to express the hurt, the confusion, and the anger that still simmered in her chest. Nathan hesitated as if trying to find the right words, and for a moment, Emma saw a glimpse of the man he used to be, the man who had once held her close, promising her everything. But that man had been gone for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice low and broken. "Emma, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. "I made a huge mistake. A mistake that I can never undo. I left you when you needed me most, and I can never forgive myself for that." Emma remained silent, her gaze unwavering, her face carefully composed. She had spent so long trying to forget him, trying to heal from the pain he had caused. But seeing him now, standing in front of her, the weight of his apology was suffocating. She could feel the old pain bubbling back to the surface, threatening to overwhelm her. But she wouldn't let it. Not this time. Nathan's eyes filled with desperation, his voice pleading. "I thought leaving was the right thing to do. I thought I thought she was the answer. But she wasn't. She never loved me. I was so blind, and now I see what I've lost. I see what I had with you, and I can't stand the thought of it being gone forever." His words seemed rehearsed, as if he had been practicing them for weeks. They were the words of a man who had made his decision, then seen the consequences, and now was too late to fix it. Nathan had always been able to talk his way out of situations, but Emma wasn't buying it this time. Emma took a slow, deliberate step back, putting distance between them. Her emotions were swirling inside her, but she refused to let them control her. She wasn't the same woman who had stood at the altar, waiting for Nathan to show up. She had rebuilt herself. She had learned to stand on her own. "You left me when I needed you most," Emma said, her voice steady, but the words were sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "You chose her over me." Nathan's face crumpled in guilt, and for a moment, Emma thought she saw something genuine in his eyes, remorse. But then it was gone, replaced by the desperation of a man who had realized too late that he had made the wrong choice. I know I was wrong. I've spent months regretting it. But I'm asking you, Emma, please give me a second chance. I'll do anything. I swear, I'll be the man you deserve. I'll be the man who..." Emma held up a hand, cutting him off. "Stop." The single word rang out in the room, silencing him. Nathan froze, his mouth still open as if the apology he had practiced was now stuck in his throat. "No," Emma continued, her tone firm, but with an edge of finality. "You don't get to come back into my life just because it's convenient for you now. You don't get to walk in here after everything you did and expect me to welcome you with open arms." Nathan's face fell, his eyes searching hers desperately, but Emma could see through him. He was trying to play the part of the apologetic ex-lover, the man who wanted redemption, but Emma knew better. She had already forgiven him, a long time ago, in the quiet moments when she had learned to let go. But that didn't mean she owed him anything. He stepped closer, his voice quieter, more vulnerable. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to understand I've learned. I've learned that you were the one who truly loved me. I've learned that Olivia never cared for me the way you did. Emma took a deep breath, the weight of his words trying to pull her back to the past, but she refused. She couldn't let him rewrite their story. She couldn't let him manipulate her into feeling sympathy for him. No, Emma said, her voice stronger now, her words decisive. You're right, Nathan. You've learned. But the thing is, I already did. Without you. The words hit him like a punch, and for a moment, Emma thought he might collapse. The realization that she was no longer the woman he could control, that she had grown stronger without him, seemed to crush him. Emma stepped around him, moving toward the window, her back to him now. She looked out at the city, her future waiting for her. She had built this life on her own. No Nathan, no apologies, just her own strength. And now, as she looked out at the horizon, she realized she had no room for him in it anymore. Turning back to him, she spoke one final time. I don't need you anymore, Nathan. I've learned to live without you. And I'm not going back. I already did that. I already let go. Nathan stood there, his face pale, a shadow of the man he had once been. Emma could feel his presence lingering, but she knew now, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice. As Nathan turned and walked out of her office, Emma felt the final weight of his presence leave her life. He was no longer a part of her world. And with that, Emma took another step forward. A new chapter had begun. Nathan stood frozen in the doorway, watching Emma as she walked away from him, her back straight, her head held high. She moved with a grace and confidence he had never seen in her before, and it hit him like a punch to the stomach. This was the woman he had lost. This was the woman he had once taken for granted, the woman he had left standing at the altar, the woman who now stood before him, stronger and more beautiful than ever. He had seen her post on social media. Pictures of her glowing, smiling confidently, her career thriving. Every post, every new accomplishment she shared was a reminder of everything he had lost. But now, standing in the same room as her, Nathan realized something deeper. It wasn't just her success that stung. It was her independence. Emma had rebuilt herself without him, and in doing so, she had created a life far better than the one he had ever imagined. For a moment, Nathan felt a pang of regret so deep, it almost crushed him. He had left her for Olivia, the woman he thought would fill the emptiness in his life. But now, as he watched Emma move through her day, living the life she deserved, he saw the truth. Olivia had never been the answer. Olivia had used him, manipulated him, and when she got everything she wanted, she tossed him aside. Nathan had always believed that he was the one in control, the one who called the shots. But now, as he saw Emma's success, her confidence, and her contentment without him, he realized just how wrong he had been. She didn't need him. She had always been enough on her own. Emma didn't need to beg for his forgiveness. She didn't need him to make her whole. And that realization, it was a sting that Nathan could never undo. As Emma walked to the elevator, she paused and turned around, her eyes meeting Nathan's one last time. She gave him a faint, almost pitying smile, as if she could see the regret in his eyes without him even saying a word. Goodbye, Nathan, she said softly. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't an angry dismissal. It was simply the final, unspoken acknowledgement that everything between them was over. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. What was left to say? There was no excuse, no justification that would make up for the hurt he had caused her. She had made it clear she had already moved on. Emma didn't look back as the elevator doors closed, sealing the final chapter of their past. Nathan stood there, staring at the spot where she had been just seconds ago. He had lost her for good. He had made the choice to walk away, and now that choice had led him here, alone, ashamed, and defeated. As the days went on, Nathan's world continued to unravel. His professional life, once thriving, now seemed like a distant memory. The financial stability he had once taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. The job he had once been proud of was now in jeopardy, and his personal life was a mess. Olivia had walked out on him, leaving him with nothing but regret and shattered pride. Meanwhile, Emma's life was moving forward, steadily, confidently. She was thriving in her new career, earning respect in an industry she had always dreamed of breaking into. She had found happiness in her independence and self-love, something she had never realized she needed until Nathan had taken it all away. Now she was her own woman, no longer defined by the man she had once loved. She had come to terms with the pain, the betrayal, and the loss. The woman who stood before Nathan that day, rejecting his apology, wasn't the same one who had waited for him at the altar. She had found her strength in the aftermath of his betrayal. And as she rose in her career, she found that her happiness didn't depend on anyone else. It was hers to create. As Nathan sank deeper into his own despair, he watched Emma from afar. At her work events, at social gatherings, even on social media. He could see her so confident, so content. And every time he saw her, it was like a reminder of what he had thrown away. But it wasn't just her success that stung. It was the fact that she was no longer waiting for him to come back. She had closed that door and the key was gone. Nathan's life continued to fall apart, piece by piece. The love he had once shared with Emma, real or imagined, was now a distant memory. And all he had left was regret. But Emma, she was free of him. She had built a life without him. A life that was full of possibility, full of promise. Nathan would never be part of it again. Emma's closure. In the end, Emma found her peace, her closure. Not in Nathan's apology but in her own ability to move forward. Nathan had left her broken and alone, but she had come out of it stronger, more independent, and more alive than she had ever been. She no longer needed to look back at what could have been. She had created a future for herself. A future she was proud of. Nathan's absence no longer haunted her. It had become the catalyst for her own transformation. She was no longer the woman who waited at the altar for a man who couldn't be trusted. She had become someone else. Someone more resilient, more determined, and more confident. Nathan's life, meanwhile, was stuck in a loop of regret and failure. His reputation was tarnished, his career in freefall, and his personal life a mess. The regret gnawed at him, but it wasn't something he could fix. Not anymore. Emma chose to leave the past behind, choosing instead to focus on her future. She had learned the hardest lessons about love, betrayal, and the power of self-worth. She no longer needed anyone else to validate her. She knew her value. And with every step forward, she left Nathan and his mistakes further behind her, never looking back. As Emma turned her back on Nathan, her steps steady and resolute, a wave of clarity washed over her. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. Yet here she was, stronger than ever. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, rediscovering her strength and independence in ways she hadn't imagined possible. The woman she had once been, broken and lost, was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth. Emma took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and looked forward, not backward. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. She didn't need anyone to complete her. The love she had given to Nathan, the trust she had placed in him, had been real. But in the end, she had found something even more powerful. Self-love. She didn't need his validation, his apologies, or his regrets to define her. I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be, Emma thought, a smile tugging at her lips. And I don't need him to complete me. I'm enough on my own. The final shot was of Emma walking confidently toward her future, one filled with endless possibilities. She was free, and Nathan's regret would remain in the past, where it belonged.